Chapter 134. OJ popped open the back of the Bronco, the original for sure, not the replica. I could detect subtle differences, and not just the presence of hubcaps, and began removing hold-all after hold-all. He unzipped the first one, and handed us each a variety of security passes with our photographs on them. Photographs that matched our new, fake faces, and also names that, though fabricated, used our real initials. So I was now Martin Boland, and Rachel was Rowley Miller, while Hitler found himself monikered Anton Hastings, and George W. was Gary Wayne Busey. Gary Busey like the actor, I said. People can have the same names as actors, OJ answered. And anyway, Gary Busey's real name is William. It's his middle name that's Gary, so they're quite different, all in all. It's all right by me, George chuckled. I like that guy, and I always wondered what it would be like to be called Gary. He looked down proudly at his name badge and gave it a little spit and polish, with some spit from his mouth and some polish from his pocket. Yes, sir, he said, Gary Wayne Bush is who I is from now on. Busey, OJ hissed at him. But not that it matters too much. Your work lies mostly elsewhere, keeping the FBI at bay. He reached into the hold-all and pulled out a large brick phone and address book. Here, he said, handing them to George, you know what you gotta do. And George solemnly took them and walked off to go stand in a corner and begin his dialing. Okay, OJ said. For the rest of you, this is where the real work begins. We've got the best part of 10 days to get these 3 buildings wired up with explosives. At 8:46 a.m. on the morning of the 11th, the first airplane is going to hit the World Trade Center, Tower 1. If we're not done by then, not only are we in trouble, but the entire future of civilization is a goner. Unpleasant as it sounds, these 3 towers must fall. There's no other possible timeline available to us, and believe you me, we've looked. A silence fell upon the group as the import of what he was outlining dawned on us. Hold on a second, I said. Yes, Limey, OJ asked, looking at me and then at his watch and then back at me. Well, I mean, I don't want to be no party pooper or nothing, but I don't remember the bit where I signed up for this. OJ and AC looked at one another. AC sighed. Where did you think it was heading? He said. What other possible destination could there be? Did we need to spell everything out for you? Easy, AC, OJ said. I know you're not feeling great about this, but there's no reason to take it out on Marlon. Yeah, AC said, disconsolately, and for some reason avoiding looking at me. You're right, OJ. I just feel like, for God's sake, if only he hadn't watched that soccer game, we wouldn't be here today. You think I want to murder 3,000 of my fellow countrymen, Limey? You think I wouldn't rather be here saving lives? And yet, he trailed off. I had no idea what he was talking about. OJ turned to AC. You know we weren't supposed to get into this. You know what we have to do. I know, said AC. I know. But now that we're here, now that all the planning and the figuring out is over, God damn it, he said, pointing up to the ceiling of the car park or parking garage, depending on where you're from. There are thousands of actual human lives up there who, in 10 days' time, will be dead because of us. And tens of thousands more that will be traumatized forever, and years of war that will be wreaked upon the planet. He turned angrily and kicked his foot on the tire of the Bronco. OJ put his hand on his shoulder but said nothing. He could, I suppose, have tried to talk him round, have reminded him of everything they'd been through, or spoken once more of their knowledge of all the possible alternate timelines and the things they'd seen on cue. But what was the point in reiterating what AC already knew? It wasn't an intellectual dilemma he was having. It was an emotional battle that raged in his very human heart. To direct the tram this way or that, to kill the baby but save the lives of millions, to cause a tragedy but prevent an infinitely greater one some distance further down the line. AC gripped the Bronco hard and closed his eyes. He let out an enormous bellowed, "No!" just like they do in the movies, and then he seemed okay. Right, said OJ. Like AC, I know everyone here, or most of us at least, aren't exactly thrilled about what we have in store. But, hold on, I said. I never got to say my piece. I don't even know what's going on here. What the hell was all that about, blaming the whole thing on me just because I watched a game of football when I was a boy? Limey, OJ said. Forget about it. There's nothing anyone could have done differently. Nothing anyone can do differently from here on in. You're blameless as far as anyone who matters is concerned. And that includes the big man upstairs. He motioned above our heads. If he'll permit me to speak on his behalf. You couldn't have avoided that soccer game any more than the moon could have avoided orbiting the earth. And what my good friend's forgetting, he glared at AC, a mixture of stern ticking off and infinite tenderness, is just how bad things could have been. But it's hard, I know. It's the dilemma of the ages. It's the conundrum the whole Bhagavad Gita is built around. Krishna's God's eye perspective versus Arjuna's compassionate and very real but limited by finiteness human viewpoint on life. I haven't read the Bhagavad Gita, I said. Well, said OJ, stepping forward and taking my hands. For our purposes, here's all you really need to know. When Arjuna says, no way, man, I don't want to hurt other people, it's not right. His charioteer, Krishna, who knows all things perfectly, being as he's God himself, says, well, you have to, because if you don't fill these buildings full of explosives, in about 20 years' time, Mike Huckabee is going to unleash a very literal hell upon the earth. And if that happens, you'd eagerly and willingly sacrifice 3,000 of your own friends and family for just a single moment's respite from it. And do the same again the next day and the day after that. Krishna says that, I said. More or less, said OJ. Yeah. And Mike Huckabee, I said. I shouldn't have said that, he said. Let's not put that into the book. Fine, I said. I'm in. If AC is in, then I'm in too. Mostly I was worried that I was going to have to do something technical or difficult, but if it's just planting explosives, that doesn't seem too hard. Harder than you'd think, Martha piped up. But with my guide in hand, she said, sliding her pudgy manly fingers down my arm, I think you'll do all right. I looked at her and had no idea what to say. Martha Stewart, in the body of a 55-year-old slimeball and couch potato, was slithering up and down my arm, right in front of the love of my life, who currently had more of a beard than I did, and, presumably, judging by that earlier look on her face, a bigger dick too. All the while, old American footballers argued about whether to blow up 2 or 3 buildings 16 years in the past, liberally paraphrasing ancient Hindu scriptures in order to support their arguments of why it was the right thing to do, and deciding that it was. There was way too much heat and seriousness going on. It was a far cry from our breakfast bonding session just a few short hours before. We needed a little something to break the tension. But what? I had no jokes left. I couldn't even muster a fart. And judging by the looks on their faces, it may not have been the best time for one anyway. Suddenly, however, George W. strode up, thumbs hooked in his belt loops and balls seemingly swinging mighty big. So I just got off a call with Osama, he said, looking a lot more like a man and less like a slap-headed child. And I told him to ignore that earlier phone call and that we were back on for the original plan, 8:46 and 9:03. And the plane and missile for the Pentagon are all set, as well as the plane in the field. I just got to get working on the FBI now. But that other George will be well out of the picture, reading some book about ghosts to a bunch of kids in Florida. Dang, I can't believe what a tootin' fool I was back here. Man can learn a lot in 16 years. He guffawed and his shoulders shook in time with each yuck, 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 yuck. Handsome fellow, though, he said, even if I do say so myself. O.J. clasped him by the hand. Good work, George, he said. You're doing really well. Oh, shucks, George said, clearly boosted and flattered, and heading back to his phone calls looking for all the world like the cock of the ranch. Chapter 135. The plan was simple enough. We were to spend the best part of the next 10 days painting combustibles on the floors, walls and ceilings of World Trade Centers 1, 2 and 7, with days off on the Wednesday and the second Sunday to chill, explore Central Park, take in a museum or two, and eat hot dogs or pizza or whatever New York treat we fancied, with a stipend of a very generous $20 a day each for food. Martha was in charge of demolitions. The whole plan on that side of things had been hers, and she reckoned we'd work best in 2 separate teams, all coming together on the 8th to do WTC 7 together. By her schedule, we'd be finished by the evening of the 10th, which left a little leeway for us to work late into the final night if required, and a budget for overtime pay had also been made available. We were staying at the Trump International Hotel, with Mr. Fart himself coming down to meet us at reception and escorting us to our suites. Judging by the way he walked arm in arm with OJ, a.k.a. Oscar John Simons, and the elaborate handshake and hug they shared upon leaving, Trump was well and truly in on it. How that worked as far as timelines and relaying information back and forth went, your guess is as good as mine. There were obviously still many levels to the whole deal of which I was unaware, and of which I was unaware too. The work was satisfying and tiring, and in the evenings we lolled around the suite playing board games and cards and telling stories from our lives. Using the internet was out of the question. OJ knew me too well for that, the things I could have emailed to my 25-year-old self, assuming I was remembering the right mailcity.com address. And so we did it old school, with candles and hot chocolates and George playing Mum at the stove, and everything was lovely. And then, every morning we'd reconvene at the Bronco, and OJ would pull out another hold-all of combustible paint and share the cans between us, and off we'd go. Walking amongst the oblivious office workers, just another set of boiler-suited workmen doing things nobody cared about or took any notice of, all probably assuming that someone must have okayed it somewhere along the line. OJ had explained the paint on the first day, a little while after George had lightened our moods with his yee-hawing and boyish excitement after talking to Osama. "This," he said, holding up a can, "you won't see on the shelves of Home Depot or Mom and Pop's hardware store, not for another 50 years at least. What I'm holding here is the result of 40 years' work. A paint packed full of self-aware combustible that dries clear within seconds, ignites on contact with jet fuel, leaves zero trace, and burns hot enough to melt hardened steel. The conspiracy theorists like to go on about nanothermite, even though none was or will be found at the site, but they're barking up the wrong tree there. They can only hypothesize about things they know about, or can imagine, or that we tell them. But there's not a one of their theories that posits a paint like this, applied by the NFL's greatest ever running back, a home decor queen, and the Fuhrer himself." We laughed, aware of how crazy it sounded. But that's the way it goes, huh? Fact truly is stranger than fiction sometimes. "There's enough paint here," he continued, "to take down half of Manhattan. How it works exactly, I'm not 100% sure. But the guys in the lab have assured me it'll look as close to a structural failure as possible, while still allowing room for the question that it's exactly what it is, a controlled demolition." He handed us a tin each, as well as a brand spanking new roller brush tray set, and issued us with one final warning. "Don't get any in your eyes." The group went deathly silent. Would it kaboom us? Would we go blind? Would it eat into our faces and skin? OJ broke the silence. "It stings like a bitch," he said. "Flush it out with water and then get straight back to work. It's not that bad. And the clocks are ticking. Let's move it, people." He slapped each of us on our backs and ready to separate us into our 2 teams. "Team A," he said, "will be me, the General, Lieutenant Daniel, a.k.a. Danson Trevithick Knowlesley, our own demolitions expert. And another good reason it was wrong to write him out of existence, Limey. And then Major Graham here, a.k.a. Gary Boyd." "Hey," I said, "isn't it kind of funny how we all call one another by our first names, apart from the guys who go by their initials? Normally in situations like these, in the movies I mean, everybody calls each other by their surname, even when they're good buddies like in Lethal Weapon with Riggs and Murtaugh." The group nodded. "Yeah, it's true," said the General. "I've been thinking that also. I guess they do that in movies 'cause shouting, 'Look out, Roger,' or 'Run, Martin,' just doesn't sound as cool. But here in real life we're a little more friendly than that. Though I notice everybody's still calling me General." We all nodded again. He'd made a good point. But we all shuffled a little too and looked sheepishly at our feet. All he wanted was to be called Mace or Maz, and it was breaking his heart that we were forever reverting to General when everyone else was being addressed by their actual name. But in our eyes, General was what he was, and we meant no harm by it. Indeed, it was a term of respect and endearment, and showed how much we looked up to him and saw him as worthy of authority. If only his parents hadn't christened him Marion, perhaps things could have been different. But there was no way to do anything about that now. Unless... No playing with timelines. No whispering in post-war Missourian ears that giving their boys girls' names was a bad idea. No taking a trip to visit our younger, angrier selves and persuading them to concentrate their war effort on the UK and, like Napoleon should have done, leave Russia for another day. And no emailing just one set of future football scores to the past me, no matter how much energy and attention I was unavoidably devoting to trying to remember as many 2001 to 2017 scores and results as I could. Like the 2006 World Cup. Bet on Italy winning it in a shootout and put all your money on Zinedine Zidane getting a red card in the final. Or England to win the Rugby World Cup. But what year was that? 2003? 2005? The one with Johnny Wilkinson in it, that one. Or, better than any of that, Leicester's title triumph when they were 5,000 to 1, or when they were in League One a few years before. But that was only a few years ago, and I would rather my younger self, who was right now out there somewhere in the world, in Wakefield if I remembered correctly, didn't have to wait so long for his windfall. It was amazing how few sports results I could actually recall now that the pressure was on. The 2005 Ashes? For sure. Jason Gillespie hitting a double century against somebody rubbish like Bangladesh or Zimbabwe. Great odds, no doubt, but when it actually was, I hadn't a clue. England losing to Brazil in 2002. No real shock there, hence not worth betting on. But at least I could remember it. Or how about a bet that Roger Federer would win 15+ Grand Slams? That had to be decent odds in September 2001. But again, it's too long to wait for the payoff. And then I had it. Dear Marlon, you don't know me, but I'm someone who knows the future, and I have the betting tip of a lifetime for you. In a few years' time, Liverpool are going to play Andrei Shevchenko's AC Milan in Istanbul in the Champions League final. Milan will be 3-0 up at half-time, but Liverpool will get it back to 3-3 and then win, after extra time, with no more goals, on penalties. Take every penny you can find and bet on that outcome. I promise you, it's true. What would you do if you received a message like that, and then watched a few years later as the final happened exactly as predicted? Would you make the bet at half-time? Would you rush down the bookies and take the astronomical odds they would be offering on Liverpool and put your life saving on it, as well as the life savings of all the friends and family you'd been able to persuade or hoodwink or rob? To be honest, knowing the me I was then, I'd probably have forgotten about it and been off climbing some mountain somewhere when it happened, and then regretted the whole thing for the rest of my life. But what if I'd also sent a series of earlier predictions from the years that preceded the game, just to lure me in and show me that the information was good? Surely that would have worked. Yes, probably it would. So... Marlon, OJ barked at me. Are you thinking what I think you're thinking about? I don't know, I said. That would depend on what you think I'm thinking. Titters from the group. Well, it looks like you've been off in space about the last 3 minutes, and not only have you probably zoned out on some important information about how to hold your brush so you won't get paint on your hand, but my guess is that you're still plotting on how to make some money for your younger self by manipulating time, even though you know that A, it could totally screw up everything in a major way, and B, you're going to be making millions from this whole thing anyway. Plus, you have the triangle thing to call on any time you want. Millions, I thought. Well, that's the first time he'd put an actual figure on it. I'd been thinking a couple of grand at best, but holy shit, that really changes things. God only knows how I was going to concentrate on the painting now, with all those dollar signs in my mind. And still, no, I said, I was thinking, isn't it a bit weird that we have 2 Garys, Boosie and whatever Major Graham is called, when there are like 1,000 names beginning with G? 1,000? OJ said, smiling. I bet you can't even name 10. I looked inside my head, and by God he was right. The only name I could think of, repeating incessantly over and over in my mind's ear, was Garibaldi, which, first of all, is basically just Gary, and second, isn't even a name. I think, I said, more than a little humbled, that might be a bet that you would win. Exactly right, said OJ, staring at me pointedly. So let's forget all about betting and concentrate on the task in hand. If you want to take all your earnings to Vegas once we get back, you can be there in no time. There's a direct train from the Central Station leaving every 25 minutes, 24 hours a day. But one thing I can promise you, if your younger self had ever come into a substantial amount of money back then, things would not have gone well for him, nor, for that matter, for any of us. So, he said, looking around at the group, heed what I said about zero contact with the yous that are here, as well as sharing any future information with anyone. Just leave things as they are, okay? If I get back to 2017 and find the president is a mouse with 4 heads, or the U.S. is a puppet nation under Chinese rule, I'm going to be pissed with a capital P. You feel me? I nodded. We all did. I figured I would do my best. But 10 days, man, and all those computer-filled offices we were going to be working in. Oh, one last thing, said OJ. It would be perfectly normal to have 2 Garys in a group of 10 workers. Once again, Limey, it's only the movies where people never have the same name, unless the plot calls for it, and then it's just clunky and obvious. I gots to wonder sometimes where you got your education from real life or from TV. This is real life right here for sure. It don't get realer than this. So let's get on with it. Team A, grab your tins and move on out. WTC2, here we come. He picked up his own tin and brush set and turned to the rest of us. And Team F, he said, smiling, you're with Martha. Do what she tells you and try not to screw up. And off they went, moving swiftly and very soldier-like with their tins of highly combustible, self-aware paint from the future. Hey, I said, turning to AC, who was lazily seeking out his own tin. OJ just used a Stuart Lee joke, so I guess we're not the only ones here with exquisite taste in comedy. Nah, said AC, laughing. I showed him some once, and he didn't get it at all. Just thought it was some pompous asshole talking about nothing. But he did like that Team A, Team F thing. He's been wanting to use that for years. Though if he'd been able to work an A-Team reference in there and march off to the theme tune, that would have been his ultimate dream. Probably he'll try again tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that, until he gets it right. But that's OJ for you, Mr. Perseverance, and Mr. Perfectionist too. Just wait till you see the job he does on those buildings. Well, I said, I guess in a way I have already seen it, on the TV and on YouTube, over and over and over again. Yeah, said AC, but that ain't nothing to seeing in real life, right before your eyes. It's the difference between watching a McEnroe volley on some grainy old video or being there in person, sitting right behind him at Flushing Meadows. To watching Michael Jordan hanging in the air and slamming one home from courtside, or seeing what OJ did back in his prime, standing on the same field as him, 2,000 yards in one goddamn season. There's no comparison. You gotta live life, Limey. There's too much beauty in this world to confine it to 17 inches of 2-dimensional screen, you know. I nodded. I knew all right. I'd lived it in my youth, hitchhiking across nations and climbing mountains and seeing the sights. But I guess somewhere along the way I'd lost myself and grown jaded and bored and just given up. Hence why it was all movie references and things that existed on monitors and screens. But now these people had given something back to me, brought something back to life. Now I was truly living, and apart from the devious urges to earn my younger self some money, there wasn't a single bone in my body that wanted to get on a computer and point and click, the eyes consuming but never really taking anything in. Now I licked my lips for the task ahead. Now, thanks to AC's speech, I couldn't wait to see one of the most significant events of this or any other century with the retinas of my own eyeballs. Chapter 136. Every day we went to work, painting up and down those 2 huge towers. We kept in touch by radio, and there was a healthy competition and banter amongst and between the teams. OJ's side were playing a man down, what with George attending to other business, phone calls and secret meetings and buying groceries and cooking dinner. But they worked like son of a bitches and were only ever a handful of floors behind us. He and the General were both 70 years old, but were still filled with a competitive drive and the desire to win. They spurred me on. They made me want to work harder than I ever had in my life. Not simply because it was in order to destroy the World Trade Center and save the world, but more than anything, because I didn't want to let my teammates down. Lovely Rachel, crazy Martha, surprisingly sensitive Adolf, and best mate AC. AC, though, had grown sullen and silent. He painted hardcore, sure enough, as steady and relentless and thorough as the best of them. But he did it without any sense of pride or joy on his face. He was moody with the office workers we encountered. Half of them he could barely look at, and his answers to our questions were purely perfunctory. He had withdrawn into himself. I figured it was something to do with his feelings about being part of a team that was orchestrating the massacre of several thousand of his countrymen, but maybe it was something else. On the final day of painting WTC-1, we had almost reached our goal of the 93rd floor. We found ourselves alone together in neighbouring cubicles in the gents. It was like that thing that close women friends claim to experience, but science says isn't real. Except instead of our menstrual cycles synchronizing, it was our bowel movements that had fallen in step with one another. I could tell from his grunting and squeezing that he would be there for a while, and that he was effectively trapped inside the cubicle, a prisoner to his own anus. Now seemed as good a time as any to try to heal the rift that had grown between us. Finally, I had him where I wanted him, and where he couldn't escape or avoid me, as he appeared to have been doing all week. AC, I said, pointing my head to the right, in the direction of the cubicle wall that we shared. AC, man, I said again. There's something I've been thinking about. I waited for a sign from him. I knew he could hear me, but all I got back was a little plop and another grunt as he wrestled with his inner demon. I decided to try to put myself in his shoes and find some common ground. AC, man, I said, I know how you feel. I've got a right bastard here myself. I think the twat is trying to come out sideways. It's not right to have one so stubborn, especially after old George's delicious dinners and the sandwiches he makes. There's no justice in this world, man. You eat right, you get your fibre, and still your bowels manufacture a goddamn brick for you to squeeze out your bumhole. This is like giving birth, but worse. I bore down on the seat and then decided to climb up on it and squat like an Indian in an effort to alleviate the trauma and the pain. I'm sweating beads here, AC, I said. How are things your side? More grunts, more little plops in the toilet. He sounded like his was reluctantly coming out one little bauble at a time. I know those shits, I said. But keep going, man. You can do it. I squeezed. Nothing budged. The sweat ran down my forehead. I wished I was dead. Truly, there's not a woman on earth who would complain about whatever it is they go through in childbirth if she could have felt what I was feeling right then. And all while trying to have a calm and supportive conversation with a buddy who, for some reason, had decided I was no longer worth speaking with. I don't think I'm going to make it, AC, I joked. Tell my wife and kids that I love them so. A kissing/tutting sound came through the wall from next door, then a plop, and then a sigh. At least he was something, and perhaps there was hope. Perhaps... Limey, 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 AC said slowly, probably shaking his head as he did so. The lives of thousands of people are in your stupid English hands, and all you can think about is the shit you've got going on and the slight pain it's causing your ass. You're something else, and I'll tell you this as well. If you think it compares to even 1% of what childbirth is like, you're out of your goddamn mind. To say that your shit is more difficult than what the world's mothers go through every day, it's an insult to mothers everywhere. To my mother, to your mother, and for sure to the mother of all these poor fucks in this building you're so happily painting the fuck out of, and that you're so looking forward to crumble to the ground. So you'll forgive me if I'm lacking a little compassion for your plight right now." I smiled, perched upon my seat, and for a moment there forgot the squidgy brown Coke can that was trying to thread itself through the eye of my needle. My plan of saying something stupid in order to provoke a response and bring out what he was keeping within had obviously worked. Now to keep him going, but 3 or 4 more plops told me that time was running out. "I hear you, man," I said, deciding that feigning compassion was now the way to go. "There's not a moment goes by that I don't wish there was some other way we could make this work. Seeing those guys carrying their bits of paper, flirting at the water cooler, angrily slamming down phones because some stocks and shares went up or down by 0.1%, it breaks my heart to know what's in store for them and that there's nothing we can do about it." AC plopped, then muttered something under his breath, then plopped some more. I could just picture the thing he was dropping in the bowl. It must have resembled half a bunch of grapes by now. But then I realized I was totally basing it on my own experience, my own silly little grape-like turds from the past. Projection, I believe that's called. Maybe his was totally different. "Are you thinking about that idea of yours, that if I hadn't watched the game, none of this would have been necessary?" I listened. I felt some movement in my own anus hole, but it only seemed to make things worse, to be tearing at the very fabric of my being. "You heard," I said. "You heard, oh God, what, oh Jesus Christ, you heard what OJ said. You've seen the timelines. You know that if there was fuck me, something I could do, I would do it. But you know that, right?" Silence from AC's side, then a plop. Then what sounded like a bitter laugh. For my part, I was ready to concede defeat. I squeezed a little to back it up and beat a retreat and considered my position. There's no way it could fit through and make it out, but no way it could stay in either. I would have to get something up there and remove it a little at a time, or soften it up somehow with maybe chopsticks or my finger. Oh, what I wouldn't have given for a steadily plopping bunch of grapes like AC was currently producing, as opposed to this arsehole shredder and battleship destroyer of a turd, wide as it was long, and surely manufactured by an intestine that had got its measurements mixed up somewhere along the way and confused centimetres with inches. Plop, plop, squeeze, grunt, moan, yarr. We were a fine pair there, both trapped by our simultaneous dilemmas. But what I wouldn't have given to see AC's little pinky appear under the cubicle partition, searching out mine. And then a thought occurred to me that I should have probably kept inside. "Say, man," I said, "you know how we call our little fingers pinkies? But that's because we have pink skin. What do you guys call them? I've been assuming pinky also, but—" AC had had enough. There was a loud bang on the cubicle wall, which I presumed was his fist. It shocked me into a little jump on the seat, and for a moment it looked like it might have helped dislodge the beast that was wedged in my cave. But, alas, all it did was move it an inch or so and stretch my already stretched to the breaking point arsehole some more. I winced, my eyes watered. I figured they could just shoot me now, or that waiting here until the planes came and I was buried in rubble would be my only hope of salvation. "Limey," he shouted, "you drive me up the goddamn wall. Can you not just shut the fuck up and let a man shit in peace? I should have known to go in the disabled when I saw you following me in here. You had that goddamn look in your eye. You had it all week. Just leave me the hell alone, you know? Let's just do what needs to be done and get out of here." Plop, plop, squeeze, and then some movement. The thing was tearing its way through. There was light at the end of this tunnel. "AC, man," I said, through gritted teeth and teary eyes. "You know if there's anything I could do, I would." "Would you, though?" he interrupted. "Would you really? What if I told you we could get in that stupid time machine of yours, travel back to 1975, and push your mama down the stairs when you was maybe 6 months in her womb and you'd never have been born, huh? Or we could get some pedophiles to kidnap you at some point before the game. You'd have turned up dead in some rolled-up carpet on a vacant lot somewhere. Everything will be just roses. What then? But what are you talking about? I shouted. How the fuck does me watching that one game lead to this? Shit, AC tutted. If you've been paying attention, you'd know the answer to that already. After the timelines got merged and you went round bleating to everyone who would listen about that red-headed dude of yours, you went weird. You stopped trusting the world. Then one day, when you were about 17 and on a trip to London, you looked with slitted, paranoid eyes at some guy who reminded you of that soccer player, whatever his goddamn name was, and that guy later bumped into... I was trying, ladies and gentlemen, I was really trying, but concentrating on what he was saying was impossible. The turd was slowly making its way, sliding out of my anus like the Titanic sliding out of its dry dock before her maiden voyage, and it was taking everything in my power to stop myself from losing consciousness. My arms were pushed against the walls, my jaws and eyes were squeezed tight shut, the light shining inside my mind was blinding. Oh God, I said, take me now. I can't stand another second. There is no way through. There is no way out. There is... And then, with one last rip-roaring surge, it was done and crashed into the bowl, and I was left breathless and soaked in sweat, perched upon the seat with my boiler suit round my ankles and my head in a daze. And I don't know if that would work, AC was saying, apparently reaching his own conclusion with the final two plops. But yes, if you're saying you wish there was something you could do, then that's what it would be. But OJ don't want it, and I doubt whether a guy like you would pull your finger out your ass and take an initiative like that anyway. Shit, what's your life worth versus these thousands out here? But I know what your answer would be. I sat in silence trying to come back to my senses. I couldn't believe that I had made it out the other side. And now AC was telling me that all I had to do was travel to my own childhood and ruin or extinguish my life to save these countless thousands and all the subsequent wedding parties and Muslim family gatherings that I'd accused his country's Marines of spoiling. I weighed it up. I mulled it over. And maybe I came to the conclusion that I did because I was high, not in my right mind, detached from reality and riding some blissful waves of liberation-inspired ecstasy. Someone had told me once never to take a potentially life-altering decision when high on drugs, or when drunk out of your mind, or when you've just watched an emotional, tear-jerking Hollywood movie. And to that, I think I could have added, and when you've just given birth to the biggest turd in history and basically travelled through all 144 levels of heaven and hell in the process. AC, I said, for God's sake, yes, yes, and yes. Of course I'll do it. It's one life. It's just me. I'm sure most of the people working in these buildings are good people, liked people, well-loved people. And if 20 or even 50 of them are arseholes, so what? There'll be countless more who have families, have children, who will go on to do good things with their lives if they make it through tomorrow. I'm okay, man. I've had a decent time. I'm ready to check out, even if it means creating the confusing scenario of my never having been born in the first place. My head pondered, wondered how we would even have this conversation if we were to go back and wipe me out. Wondered how we were having it, given that probably meant I had been born after all and made it to at least 2017 and age 42. Timelines, probably, divergent realities, infinite universes, all possibilities existing at once. It was beyond the capability of my brain to fathom, but I did know, even in my weary and ravaged state, even with the sweat and the tears that ran down my face, that none of that mattered one bit. That I was still there, and that the only thing I could control was what I could do with my body and my words and my mind. I'll do it, AC, I said. I'll fucking do it. Let's stop this now and go back to the car and sort this out. I don't care what OJ says. I don't need to exist. The world will still quite happily turn without me, and it'll save everybody else. And as long as there's not some goddamn Hitler or Antichrist out there in those offices who needs to perish in this rubble, and you've got all the timeline stuff worked out, I'll do it. Meanwhile, the whole time I'd been making my speech, I'd also been wiping my arse, and came to the end of both my determined declaration and the wiping at the exact same moment. I climbed down from the toilet seat, and I was just about to turn around and look in the bowl to behold the behemoth I'd just laid when I heard AC's voice sound from outside the door. "Limey," he said, "open the door." I paused. I slid the latch. I opened the door. Everybody was there. Everybody, including the guys from the other building, and even Gary/George. And they were all smiling at me and holding out their arms as though they wanted to hold me in some sort of group hug. "God damn, Limey," said AC. "It took you long enough. You think I've enjoyed being a bitch to you these past 7 days? But this was your final test, your true initiation into the highest rank of Freemason. For a man has no greater love than this, that he would lay down his life for another man, for a stranger, and even for an asshole too." I looked at them all standing there, looking at me with wide pleased grins and eyes. I was flabbergasted. In my head, I was on my way to abort my own fetus so as to save the office workers who were currently occupying the corridors and desks and cubicles outside this toilet. And now I found it was all a test. I had no idea what to say. And then, finally, I did. "How long have you all been there?" I asked. "The entire time," Hitler piped up, smiling. And then I remembered. "Hey, man," I said, "no hard feelings. I meant the you used to be, not the you are now. You're a changed man. You seem much better now. I like you." "No hard feelings," he said, pulling me into the group. "I understand 100%. I would have assassinated me too." We laughed, we hugged, and then we shuffled awkwardly towards the door, with far too many of us to be squeezed into a space like this. And then I remembered again. "My turd," I said. "You guys have got to see this." I ran back into the cubicle and looked down in the bowl, expecting to be greeted by a monster of world record proportions, but there was nothing there. Same as it ever was, I thought. They stay for days when you want them to go away, and then the ones you wish would hang around, at least long enough for a photo op or for other people to look at them, disappear without a trace, as if by some sort of magic. I pushed the handle glumly, flushing nothing but paper, and wondered if I'd ever shit like that again. Perhaps not, I thought. Perhaps that was the one, and I would forever look back on it and wonder what might have been. But still, there were worse things in the world than not having any eyewitness or photographic evidence for the biggest shit you ever did.